Night School.
Night School.
So today I want to talk about Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. Graham Hancock, I'm familiar with him mostly originally through his appearances on Rogan. He's done a lot of those, and a lot of them with a guy named Randall Carlson, who supports a lot of his ideas. But this was the book that put Graham Hancock on Rogan's radar, and this was what they were originally discussing on like their first episode together. And it's a book that I've owned for a long time and like wanted to get around to reading, and one that I've taken many runs at. Like I've probably started reading it 3 times before now, and this time it took me like 2 months to actually get through it. But
yeah, it's a daunting book.
It's really daunting. There's a lot of evidence for his ideas, and some of it was also tough in that it's ideas that I've heard him express on podcasts and in other formats already. So a lot of it was kind of stuff that I had heard in different contexts before, which made it a little bit less exciting to get through. But his ideas are fascinating, and to give a broad picture of what his ideas are, the fingerprints of the gods that the title refers to are evidence, well, as the subtitle says, evidence of Earth's lost civilization. So a civilization that existed before what we believe to be the start of civilization. So a civilization, something like Atlantis that Plato talked about, that existed before, and then there was a great flood, and then they went around and kind of seeded humanity again and educated us in the ways of civilization, and that things built up from there. And that civilization is not something that is just a steady incline, because that's kind of the way that that's the typical modern viewpoint of technological development and civilization development, is that we learn something and then we build on that, and it goes up and up and up.
Right. That makes us feel kind of superior and invincible.
Yeah, because it means that we are the smartest that we have ever been. But when you look at certain like megalithic architecture that we are not capable of doing, like the Great Pyramids, like the Sphinx, like all the pyramids and temples that are in South America, it shows that they clearly knew something or had some type of technology that we didn't have access to.
We still don't.
That we still don't. And a lot of the evidence that Graham presents shows that they had technological knowledge that we didn't have until the last couple hundred years, and like information that we didn't have until the last couple hundred years, and that they documented it a long time ago, and we're just now catching up with them. And so the book is about that, and about just all the evidence behind that. And I want to share some of the more interesting stuff in there, some of the stuff that caught my attention.
Thank you. I'm grateful to have a synopsis of this book, because I wasn't going to tackle it.
It's a lot. So there was a guy named Piri Reis who was a cartographer, and he put together what is known as the Piri Reis map in Constantinople in 1513. And this map is one of the major sources that people have looked back on since then. That's one of the major source maps that we've looked back on. And in the 50s, a guy named Charles Hapgood realized that there's a part of the map at the bottom that nobody was ever publicly discussing broadly, but that what it depicted was part of Antarctica, Queen Maud Land specifically. But it was Queen Maud Land as it does not exist today because it's covered in ice, which implies that he had access to knowledge about what Antarctica looked like below the ice accurately. And he presented this idea to people and was bringing attention to it, and was widely mocked and never got any proper recognition for the fact that he had caught this and many other maps with similar...
So this was a modern scholar being mocked for noticing that a map from the 1500s depicted what Antarctica looked like thousands of years before then.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. What Antarctica has not looked like since at least 4,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And we didn't even discover Antarctica until 1818. So this map predates the discovery of Antarctica by 1513. So I don't know what people were thinking about. Like, they're just like, well, he just got something wrong there. We don't know what that is. Or that's an island that sank or whatever, something like that. But he brought this to the attention of the government, and there's like a letter from the government explaining like, yeah, we don't know, but that's interesting anyway. And he never got any real acknowledgement for it in a very public way until after his death. And I don't know if he got anything very public until Graham Hancock was saying it. But Albert Einstein was actually very much in favor of his idea. There's a couple quotes from Einstein that I wanted to share. Einstein said in 1953, "I frequently receive communications from people who wish to consult with me concerning their unpublished ideas. It goes without saying that these ideas are very seldom possessed of scientific validity. The very first communication, however, that I received from Mr. Hapgood electrified me. His idea is original, of great simplicity, and, if it continues to prove itself, of great importance to everything that is related to the history of the Earth's surface." So Einstein thought that the idea was brilliant and that, clearly we need to be paying more attention to this. And he even wrote a foreword for Charles Hapgood's book when he wrote it.
Cool.
And Charles Hapgood also proposed an idea called Earth crust displacement. The idea basically being that this is different from continental drift, from there used to be Pangea and then the continents have drifted apart, and you can see how South America and Africa click together. Mm-hmm. It's a different thing than that. The idea is basically that the whole, I believe it's a 30-mile layer called the lithosphere of the outside of the Earth can get displaced think of the skin of an orange, but if it wasn't attached to it very directly. And if something happens, it can end up spinning. And so all at once, the whole world shifts to a slightly different position. And then that would make the temperature in the areas change drastically. Because the weather would get reassigned. It would be getting weather from a totally different part of the world all of a sudden.
So you're saying that a 30-mile deep layer of the entire planet can shift can shift compared to the layers deeper.
Exactly.
The entire planet at the same time.
So it's just the 30-mile skin of the planet ends up shifting while the core, everything beneath that, stays in position.
Right.
And that could explain why there would have been such a big change in Antarctica to where there was a time where we could see everything beneath it because it was not covered in ice.
Yeah.
And that is just a theory that Charles Hapgood had, but Einstein did support it and gave a little explanation as to how could something like that happen? What would cause that to happen? And he said, "In a polar region, there is continual deposition of ice, which is not symmetrically distributed about the pole. The Earth's rotation acts on these unsymmetrically deposited masses and produces centrifugal momentum that is transmitted to the rigid crust of the Earth. The constantly increasing centrifugal momentum produced in this way will, when it has reached a certain point, produce a movement of the Earth's crust over the rest of the Earth's body." So he's saying that lopsided weight on the top of the world can eventually get so great that it loosens the crust enough that slips so that it's on the outside spinning instead of at the top of the top. It's spinning around the outside.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting idea and not something that I really hear Graham Hancock talk much about anymore. Because these days, this seems to be before his relationship with Randall Carlson at all. Randall Carlson and him now almost seem like partners in their scientific endeavors these days. And Randall Carlson is a geologist who focuses on the idea of the what is it called? The something impact theory. Evan, do you remember it? The Younger Dryas impact theory. Thank you. And that refers to the era. The Younger Dryas would be the era I believe it's about 13,000 years ago, that there may have been a meteor impact that several spots on the Earth got hit, and that ended up triggering the shift in climates, including in Antarctica. Back then. So I don't know how much this Earth displacement, this crust displacement idea holds weight these days, because this book was written in the 90s. It's interesting. It even talks about how the Mayans have predicted that the world is going to end in 2012.
Oh, wow.
which of course did not happen. But he's like talks about the idea that like, well, they seem to say it's coming. And it's just sort of a funny thing now to read.
Right.
Although I do entertain sometimes, like, what if it's not exactly what they meant? What if there is some sort of era that ended around that time or something that started to happen but has not come to fruition yet? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's just wild speculation. So Charles Hapgood found this Piri Reis map and like this odd thing about it that showed part of Antarctica that couldn't have been mapped until 4,000 or unless it was 4,000 years ago or longer. We actually didn't even have until the 1950s. In 1950s, we got like the seismic survey technology to be able to look through the ice and to map that. It wasn't so that is why then it wasn't until then that we realized like,
now we can go back and compare what was up with that
exactly.
other map.
Yeah. So Hapgood was just the first one to notice that after those seismic studies. That makes sense. Yeah.
Great.
There were other maps. Hapgood got really obsessed with the maps and with like finding other maps that showed similar things. Oh, Piri Reis, by the way, and as far as like how did he get this information, he said that he was basing it on older source maps, that he had gotten access to older source maps. And Graham Hancock alludes to the possibility that may have come from the Library of Alexandria, that there may have been ancient maps there that he may have had access to.
That was a Greek library?
I think so. I believe so, but I'm actually not totally sure.
It's Alexandria's in Egypt, but I think it's culturally Greek.
Okay, in Egypt, but culturally Greek.
It's named after Alexander the Great.
Right. Okay.
Guy's good.
He's very good. He found other maps. The Orontius Phineas map showed all of Antarctica. It showed almost all of Antarctica, which would have gone back like 8,000 years before you'd be able to see that. And he continued and found a different map by a guy named Bosch that showed the entirety of Antarctica, no ice on it at all, which wouldn't have been possible unless it was at least 15,000 years ago.
Wow.
And I'm not exactly sure where those dates come from. I assume it's geological weather stuff, but I know there's issues with carbon dating, so I'm not quite sure how all those dates come about, but it was a very long time ago. What also makes these maps so amazing is that they have, they're very accurate, and they have accurate longitude, which we didn't have the ability to accurately do longitude until the 1750s. Before that, we were able to do latitude, which is the horizontal lines, because that you can do with just like looking at the stars and the sun. And I don't understand exactly the mechanisms of all of it.
Yeah.
But in order to be able to get longitude correct, you have to have access to a very accurate watch, a very accurate clock of some kind. So accurate that it can only lose up to 3 seconds a day. And it took a very long time before anybody was able to come up with that technology until the 1750s or 1760s, maybe.
Okay.
But yeah, we had no idea how to make a map that would accurately, like anywhere near as accurately as these ancient maps were. Graham also spends a lot of time in the book exploring just the sort of cultural similarities of different stories from different cultures about the origins of civilization. And all over South America are mythologies about Viracocha or the Viracocas. And they're basically tall white men with long bushy beards that wear robes and carry a staff. And they go around and they are very loving, and they come out of the sea and they teach everybody about civilization. They tell people things like, don't do polygamy, don't do cannibalism, here's how you farm, here's how you do irrigation, just teaching general, like how you can have a civilized society stuff to people. And he has all kinds of different names: Viracocha, Waracocha, Kontiki, Tanupa, Tapak, Tupaca, Illa. He has all kinds of different names across different cultures throughout South America.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. Also all over South America, there's pyramids, which of course are all over Egypt and the Middle East as well. And it is strange how consistently the people there report that the pyramids were used for sacrificing people on top of, at least in South America.
Right.
They were almost all of the cultures in South America, according to Graham Hancock, practiced ritual sacrifice of humans. And most of them said that the reason they were doing it was to delay the end of the world, that they were appeasing some god that was going to end the world if they didn't do it. There was a story of 80,000 people being killed at the top of a pyramid in a single day.
Whoa.
And stories of like how the blood clotted at the bottom. There was blood clots forming at the bottom of the pyramid. And it was all to appease the gods and stop the end of the world. So maybe that's why it didn't happen in 2012. Maybe they did it. I don't know. There was an interesting... Also, many of these cultures all over the world have stories about the Great Flood, about how like the last round of humanity died because of a great flood, and about how that was not the first round of humanity, and how there's been many rounds of humanity before that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to share one such mythology going through the different suns that we have been through. This account is taken from a rare collection of Aztec documents known as the Vaticano-Latin Codex. The first sun, the Matlactli Atl, the duration was 4,008 years. Those who lived then ate water maize called Atzitzintli. In this age lived the giants. The
Bless
first... You. What?
Bless you.
Thank you. The first sun, or it was called... No. In this age lived the giants. The first sun was destroyed by water in the sign 10 water. It was called flood and deluge, the art of sorcery of the permanent rain. Men were turned into fish. Some say that only one couple escaped, protected by an old tree living near the water. Others say that there were 7 couples who hid in a cave until the flood was over and the waters had gone down. They repopulated the earth and were worshipped as gods in their nations. Second sun, duration 4,010 years. Those who lived then ate wild fruit. This sun was destroyed by the wind serpent, and men were turned into monkeys. 1 man and 1 woman standing on a rock were saved from destruction. The third sun lasted 4,081 years. Men, the descendants of the couple who were saved from the second sun, ate a fruit. This third sun was destroyed by fire. And the fourth sun, duration was 5,026 years. Men died of starvation after a deluge of blood and fire. And there was many other examples given in a much like quicker, like a much more rapid fire way of different cultures that say there was a great flood and that like a few people survived the great flood. One of them made me laugh though because it just said 2 brothers survived the great flood. So
Two brothers.
So I don't know how that worked. But yeah, they all say there was a great flood.
They gave IQ tests out to a bunch of primates, trying to figure out which one was closest, and just went for it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think there was probably a great flood because everybody says there was a great flood and that not very many people lived through it.
It's cool how everybody has a different symbol of method of surviving flood, like cave, rock, giant boat, tree.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'd be curious what that means about each culture, why they would pick those symbols and everything. That's interesting.
Yeah. I'm going to sound a little dumb talking about this because there was so much math, so much geometry and trigonometry that goes into the explanations for it. But many of the pyramids have all sorts of math numbers built into them to show how advanced their society was.
Right.
Like the Great Pyramid at Giza and the Great Pyramid at Cholula in Mexico, which is, I believe, the largest man-made structure ever by mass. And it was made over like 4 different generations. Like there's like one built the original part of the pyramid, and then like just multiple cultures added onto it, and it's gotten bigger and bigger since then, to the point where it's now the biggest man-made structure. But the structure of both of those has pi built into it, like something about the relationship between the height and width of it shows that like they were divisible by pi, and that they were clearly showing that like, oh no, we know about pi and we know about how to calculate a circle. All the measurements of the size and weight of the Earth are built into the Great Pyramid at Giza in a way that's just like overwhelming to read through it. But they clearly show that like we know exactly how big the world is. We know it's a sphere, and the dimensions of the Giza pyramid from like the top, if you've built a dome around it, would be a perfect sphere, just like the Earth. And the measurements of it show that they are aware of how many units the Earth is in comparison to the pyramid.
Right.
So it shows that all of these cultures understood spherical trigonometry and had mapped the whole world already and knew the whole thing. And the Giza pyramids, or the Giza necropolis, as Graham Hancock and several of the people that he talks to refer to it, is just
What does that mean exactly, necropolis?
like a death area, like an area. Well, because this guy Robert Boval that he speaks to, he's really into the meanings of everything that's going on at Giza, and he doesn't view it, because when I hear about people talking about Giza and about the pyramids there, people talk about it mostly as just like it's the Egyptians did it. But he gets more specific with it in a way that I think is interesting, in that he's saying it's a cult of Osiris that built it.
Okay.
That a cult that lived for a very long time, because he believes that the Giza plateau, everything there was built over the course of 10,000 years. And that from start to finish, it was clearly done with some sort of master plan in mind, despite the fact that it was done over such a long time, that there may have been some cult that was fading over it because the construction gets a little bit worse as time goes on, which is such an interesting thing about it, that like the oldest pyramid, the Great Pyramid, the oldest pyramid at Giza, there are older ones elsewhere, but the construction of the oldest pyramids are the nicest ones.
Interesting.
And the ones that are made more recently are more in ruins because they were not made with the same level of expertise as the other ones. So our technology seems to be declining over time. But the Giza Plateau and the necropolis, as Robert Boval puts it, he says that it is basically all just one riddle. And there was a really interesting quote I want to pull here. He says, 5,000 years on, it still gets you. It involves you whether you like it or not. It forces you into a process of thinking, forces you to learn. The minute you ask a question about it, you've asked a question about engineering, you've asked a question about geometry, you've asked a question about astronomy. So it forces you to learn about engineering and geometry and astronomy, and gradually you begin to realize how sophisticated it is, how incredibly clever and skillful and knowledgeable its builders must have been, which forces you to ask questions about mankind, about human history, eventually about yourself too. You want to find out. This is the power of the thing. So his attitude is that the whole Giza Plateau is a puzzle that is meant to show you that, like, if you can understand enough of this, eventually it's going to have more to teach you. And I think that's a really interesting idea. And there's all kinds of astronomical alignments with it. Like the Giza Pyramid faces due north, and the arrangement of the Great Pyramid at Giza and the two next largest pyramids, they align up at certain points in time with Orion's belt. Like, there are certain times where those three are perfectly down below in the right, slightly off a line as Orion's belt.
Right.
And so there's all kinds of just different meaning built into everything at Giza. And it makes me think about, like, as Graham Hancock has said, the Egyptian government has Egyptology very locked down, and you have to be thinking right to be allowed to even do any sort of research there, because they want to really control the narrative of everything that there is to know at Giza.
Right.
So we're really working with, like, both hands tied behind our back. We're not getting any of the information that we probably should about what's going on at Giza, or the people that are not sharing it. Because people like Graham, I don't think Graham Hancock's even allowed in Egypt anymore, because his ideas are too incorrect. They don't fit with the popular narrative.
Too wrong.
Too wrong.
Too wrong.
This whole book also, it's so interesting, like, just from an adventure point of view, because this whole story, he's writing this book over the course of a few years, and he's actually traveling to all of these places. He's actually going to all these pyramids, and he has his wife Santha with him the whole time. And there's pictures all throughout the book of, like, the different structures that they're at and just the sheer size of them. And she's taking all the pictures, and they're getting in, like, really dangerous situations. They're driving along cliffsides roads that nobody ever drives on, and are just inches from dying.
And they were even doing some bribing to get around too, right?
Yeah, they went to Giza, and they wanted to climb to the top of the Great Pyramid, which you're not allowed to do. At least at that time in the 90s, you were not allowed to do it because too many people die doing it. Because some of the steps that you have to go up in order to get to the top of the pyramid are like 3 feet tall. And so if you slip, you can just end up, like, slinky falling all the way down to the bottom, and people die trying to climb the pyramid.
Yeah.
But they really wanted to climb the pyramid. So they hired a guy who, like, they bribed a guard, and they got him to take them there in the middle of the night. And they then had to go around to every face of the pyramid and bribe each person, but also be careful to, like, bribe the right amount so that the other ones didn't get upset in regards to, like, their relative positions of power amongst each other. Because if one ended up getting more money, then they might end up narking, or if one didn't get enough in their opinion. So it's just such a complicated game they had to play, and they had to do it in the middle of the night because you certainly couldn't pull it off during the day. And it took them like hours to go up and down. And it's such an amazing, exciting story at times.
Yeah.
Of just, like, them really going out there and really putting boots on the ground at all of these places, and, like, feeling the energies of these areas, and, like, feeling what that feels like to be there. He's like laying in sarcophagi in pyramids and stuff, because there are some pyramids you're allowed to go into, and but yeah, really amazing how far out they were willing to go for this research.
Right.
The Egyptian Book of the Dead. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, of course.
Like, the Egyptian Book of the Dead apparently, like, lines up really well with ideas in South American books of the dead, like descriptions of the 9 levels that you'll have to go through, and, like, passwords that you'll have to have, and things tests you'll have to pass in order to eventually make it all the way through death. And according to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, become a star. Like, if you pass all the tests, you become a star instead of getting reincarnated or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of overlap between their ideas about death, which would likely come from some previous culture.
Right.
There's a lot said about the Sphinx, and this is something that, like, he's talked about on Rogan quite a bit as well. There's a geologist named Robert Schoch, and Robert Schoch had investigated the Sphinx and found that there is significant water erosion on the Sphinx. And a lot of people say, like, no, you're thinking it's like sand erosion probably, or wind erosion. But that sort of water erosion couldn't have happened unless it was at least 5,000 BC, where there would have been enough rain in that area for it to have that level of erosion, which goes back 2,500 years further than traditional Egyptology is willing to acknowledge. And it is also perfectly lined up to the east. It faces perfectly east. And Graham Hancock goes as far as to say that he thinks, and as does Robert Bauval, the other Egyptologist that he had spoken to, that it was originally not, because it's recarved. The Sphinx did not originally have a human face. It was originally either a lion or a dog. I've heard people say dog, but Graham Hancock believes it was a lion, and that marks the age of Leo. And the age of Leo would have been 10,400 BC, so 12,000 years ago.
Right.
So if it was meant to be like a marker of a certain age, it was way, way older than anybody thinks it is.
Wow, that's cool.
I've gotten through my notes faster than I expected to.
Dope.
But yeah, it's just like these ideas to me seem so hard to look away from. Like there's clearly so much we don't know about history. And there is one more I wanted to share. There's a pyramid, or it's not a pyramid. It's a temple called Sacsayhuaman, and I believe it's dedicated to Viracocha, but it's in South America or Mexico, one of the two. But it has stones built in it. It is built of stones that are cut more precisely than we would be able to cut them, and in various weird jigsaw-like shapes, so that it's not like they're not just bricks. They're cut in all kinds of odd shapes. Many of the stones weigh 100 tons. Some of the stones weigh 360 tons. And these stones would have been cut and moved 10 miles and then placed in place perfectly.
And it was over the 10-mile journey was over a mountain range too,
Yes,
wasn't it?
It was over a mountain range. And I believe I have that quote here. Let me find that.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So there was an explorer that was there, I believe I don't want to say the time. I'm not sure when he was there, but an explorer that was exploring South America and discovered this place. And he said, and his name was Garcilaso de la Vega. Its proportions are inconceivable when one has not actually seen it. And when one has looked at it closely and examined it attentively, they appear to be so extraordinary that it seems as though some magic had presided over its construction, that it must be the work of demons instead of human beings. It is made of such great stones and in such great number that one wonders simultaneously how the Indians were able to quarry them, how they transported them, and how they hewed them and set them one on top of the other with such precision. For they disposed of neither iron nor steel with which to penetrate the rock and cut and polish the stones. They had neither the wagon nor oxen to transport them, and in fact there exist neither wagons nor oxen throughout the world that would have sufficed for the task. So enormous are these stones, and so rude the mountain paths over which they were conveyed. And then he also said, Garcilaso also reported something else interesting. In his royal commentaries of the Incas, he gave an account of how, in historical times, an Inca king had tried to emulate the achievements of his predecessors who had built Sacsayhuaman. The attempt had involved bringing just one immense boulder from several miles away to add to the existing fortifications. This boulder was hauled across the mountain by more than 20,000 Indians, going up and down very steep hills. At a certain spot, it fell from their hands over a precipice, crushing more than 3,000 men. In all the histories I surveyed, this was the only report which described the Incas actually building or trying to build with huge blocks like those employed at Sacsayhuaman. The report suggested that they possessed no experience of the techniques involved and that their attempt had ended in disaster. So they were just trying to do it the slave way, and they died trying to. 3,000 of the 20,000 people died trying to do it the slave way.
What a day. Can you imagine being there for that? Like the Toyota Center right here, our local Coliseum holds 6,000, like for a sold out hockey game. And picturing half of that room being crushed by a rock is so absurd.
Yeah.
Like, I can't help but laugh. It's tragic, but it's like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. And I don't have the quote handy, but Graham Hancock does allude to the fact that in some Egyptian writing, it alludes to the idea that magicians of some kind had some sort of sound technology, some sort of sound thing that made stones levitate.
Yeah.
And that seems as plausible an explanation as any, that there's just there's something you can do to a stone that reduces its mass to the point where you could precisely cut it and move it around however you wanted to.
Yeah.
Because the Great Pyramids, like I can't explain it in a way that gives the impact that Graham does, but they are done with such precision that we can't do it. Like, it's not, we might be able to move some of the outside stones at the Giza pyramid, but we could not place them as precisely. And over the course of all of those bricks, we would end up getting a few inches off or something with it wouldn't be perfect right angles and stuff, but they were damn near perfect. They were more perfect than we would ever be able to pull off. So there was something going on. Either there was magicians of some kind or some kind of spirit or extraterrestrials, but that doesn't really help that much either. There's got to be some technology that they have, because just because they're from space doesn't mean they could make it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really like these ideas. I love the idea that there's mystery and that we don't have everything figured out, and that there's more to life, and there's more to humanity than what we have now, and that this is not the peak. Like, we're declining in a lot of ways, and that we have a lot that we could still learn, which is kind of a hopeful idea that, like, no, we don't. This isn't it. Like, we didn't get there because this doesn't feel that good. Our society doesn't feel that great. It feels like it could certainly be better.
Right.
And this alludes to the fact that it should be.
I watched the Channel 5 news coverage of San Francisco this morning, and I think we have room to grow still.
Is that
Andrew Callahan?
Andrew Callahan.
Greatest journalist on the planet.
He's very fun. I like him a lot, yeah.
The main question that I'm left with after that relates to what you were just saying. Like, after this presentation, I'm curious, what's your favorite personal impact that learning all this mind-blowing stuff has had on you and your outlook?
I guess it feels good to know that, like, nobody knows everything, that there is still mystery, because there is sort of this idea in modern culture that, like, no, the adventure's over. Like, we did it already. But, like, no, you could still go be Indiana Jones. Like, you could still go find out things that nobody else has found out.
Oh, okay. So the possibility that, like, you could still contribute something extremely original even to a huge academic field.
Yeah, and that nobody has the answers. That like I think a big part of becoming, like, an adult is realizing that, like, oh no, everybody is as dumb as I am.
Yeah.
They all just got here and are acting like they know what's going on. And this is like a higher level of that, where it's like, oh, there's like an educational establishment that has mapped out most of history and most of physics, and they know pretty much everything that's going on, and the rest is kind of trash. But then it's clear from his research that it's like, oh no, they're acting like they know. Like, the educational establishment is kind of a big adult that's pretending it knows everything, and it doesn't know everything, but they just don't want to ask those questions very much.
Right.
And Graham Hancock gets shit on all the time for these ideas. If you go to his...
I can't imagine the Wikipedia.
It's just
that's what you're about to
pseudos in the
say.
first sentence.
Yeah, pseudos and probably the first word.
Yeah, it's all
Pseudo
that.
Hancock.
Right. It's terrible. It's terrible the way that he gets treated, and he's really just trying to get to the truth, which very few people are. So yeah, I guess it's just nice to know that the world is still mysterious.
Right.
Because that's
so
good.
Knocking off that, like, just like when you realize that your parents don't know everything, and that gives you so much more room to grow and so much more room to be excited. Like, this is on an intellectual level, this is a parent being knocked off of a pedestal.
Exactly.
It's like, not only is the educational establishment unable to answer the questions they claim to be able to answer, but it's also clear that they're really afraid of what the real answers might be and how inadequate they're going to feel compared to those truths. So it's like, man, not only are they wrong, but they're afraid, and they're just like doing their best to mitigate their fears by ignoring new information.
Yeah.
Like, wow,
they're trying to like keep something in a box. Like there's more that we could learn that they want us to not learn. Like there's stuff that if Graham Hancock and all of his friends were allowed to look around Egypt and do everything they wanted to do and use LiDAR to like look under, because there's a technology called LiDAR to like look under thing, like look down into the earth.
So they can map out like the tunnels under the pyramid.
Yeah, so you could map out everything that's going on there. You could map under. I've heard that they are using LiDAR in some areas in the Amazon and finding that like, it was like a bustling metropolis all over the Amazon. He said that on a Rogan podcast at some point. But there's all kinds of secrets and they're keeping them from us. And that means that they don't want us to have them. And if they don't want us to have them, then that means it would weaken their hold on the world.
Yeah.
And I guess I want the establishment's hold to be weakened on the world. I want it to be...
Right. You want power to be redistributed.
Yes, I want it to be
leveled.
I want it to be more of a mess. I want it to be less orderly like it is now. Because it's a false orderliness. And like but like the bulk of society is believing things that aren't true. But I think the tide is turning because I think if you asked like a random sampling of 100 people, like, what do you think of the pyramids? I think more people might say aliens than slaves.
Right.
And I think aliens is also an oversimplification of things because people are more open to aliens than they are to like, maybe there's wizards. Maybe there's real wizards, or maybe there's ghosts that could pick up rocks and edit material with their mind. Like, but people are not buying. I don't think that people are buying the slave thing as much as they used to.
No way.
And I'm thinking of that a little bit because of a recent episode of the show Survivor, where like one of the people on there was just like, "So what do you guys think about the pyramids?" And everybody was like, "Aliens."
Yeah. Everybody
just says that now because it's
wizards and aliens. It strikes me as such a similar symbol for some intelligent version of us that's so far beyond our understanding. Like as a wizard. Like if we sat down and tried to provide technical definitions of words like wizard and alien, it'd be extremely difficult.
Sure.
It's like whatever they're doing is not magic from their perspective. What they know to be the case is magic from our perspective because it's so far beyond what we feel we understand.
Yeah.
So it's just like a placeholder word for humility. Like, definitely something beyond our scope, something that had access to something that we don't.
Yeah.
Which is such a hopeful and honest answer compared to like the slave's answer. That obviously that's one of the worst answers that you could possibly give.
Yeah.
Because not only is it ignoring the complexity of what was done, but also kind of morally posturing over this culture from long ago. It's like, well, they were probably just immoral idiots that worked in big groups. It's like, so not only you need to think we're smarter than them, but you need to think we're more moral and ethical than them too. So like, we're going to ignore what they did and blame it on greed or something. It's like, it doesn't get less interesting than that.
Yeah.
But when I hear secret technology, wizards, aliens, or whatever, I kind of hear the same thing. You know what I mean?
Sure. And along those same lines, like maybe people are more comfortable with the idea of aliens than they are with the idea of humans with magical knowledge, because then that seems like, well, I mean, they're aliens. That's an unfair advantage. That's why they're so far beyond me and us.
True.
But if they're humans that have things they don't know, then that is more like, that hits us a little harder. So it's like, so they knew something we don't know? Because they would be better if it's like, well, yeah, of course they do. They're from Zeta Reticuli. Of course they know.
Right. Like we know that we're not all that we can be, but we want to believe that all we can be is only like twice as good as we are now. Right. So it's like, if we find out, if I find out that my potential as a human being is 100 times more than I am, I'm going to feel so small. That can't be the case. It must be a dinosaur from Andromeda, that did this.
Yeah. But I love Graham Hancock, and I'm glad that he's still at it. He's written many more books on this topic, and I'm sure I'll cover more in the future. The Magicians of the Gods is a pretty direct sequel to this, and there's America Before, which is about specifically like ancient civilization stuff within North America, I believe in particular, and many other books. But I think he's great, and I think the book's great, and yeah.
Well, that's great. I was thinking about earlier today, not because of the fact that you were doing something Egyptian, but unrelated, doing Toward a Deeper Meditation by John Van Auken, which goes into ancient Egyptian meditation techniques and how the alignments of pyramids said things about the chakra system and how it can be used to transcend the material and become enlightened. I've already read the book, but I'm going to review it and do it next. Do a little Egyptian kick, because that'll be another really interesting angle on what exactly they said. They said so much with the pyramids about what they knew about, like, what we would call the STEM field. And they said a lot with the pyramids about what they knew of the chakra system and how, to give a very brief preview, everything being directed towards the third eye can result in enlightenment. And so, yeah, I'm going to do that one next.
Interesting.
It'll be interesting to look at that angle of it too.
And Graham doesn't go towards a chi or ley line or chakra direction at all, but I have heard other researchers allude to the idea that the Great Pyramids at Giza and also other megalithic architecture tend to lie at the intersection of ley lines, as though they were aware that these were higher energy areas and that...
Oh, interesting.
And that these places may have been meant to focus that energy in some way. That's not something I've done a lot of research into, but I have heard people say that. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Cool.
Yeah. Got anything else you want to add?
No, man.
Cool. Night School.
Thank you so much for reading this, dude. I'm so glad that I got to get some of the key insights from this because, I'm impressed.
You're welcome.
Respect, dude.
Thank you. Thank you.
Night School.
Night School.